A kind-hearted young woman, beloved by friends and family.
Samantha always had a smile on her face. She loved people, and people loved her, and she loved her cats.
Found bludgeoned and strangled in her own home.
I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
Military people use that knot fairly often. It was a square knot.
Police explore whether her search for love took a deadly turn.
He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless.
She told me he parked in her driveway and just sat there.
He fit that mode of being a stalker.
Until a shocking discovery.
We found that he was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Reveals a killer no one saw coming.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all.
I was in shock.
Frankly, I'd never seen anything quite like this before.
Wichita Falls, Texas, a former oil boomtown that grew into a small city.
Wichita Falls is a town of about 100,000 people, about 130 miles west of Dallas.
It's quiet community. We're very close-knit community.
It does have a small town feel to it. It's not difficult to get to know just about everybody in town.
But the town's sense of security is shattered on the morning of January 6, 2003, when police get a call from a woman who says she's just discovered her friend's lifeless body in the bedroom of her home.
I was a rookie police officer, and we got this call that somebody found a body. And we rushed over to the scene. When he arrived, I remember seeing her friends, and they were very upset.
The frantic couple tell the officer the deceased woman is 28-year-old Samantha Lazark.
At this time, I still don't know what exactly is going on.
I arrived 30 seconds to a minute after the first officer arrived. So when he entered the residence, I was right behind him.
So we weapons draw, and we're clearing through the bottom of the house, the kitchen. We start going up the stairs, and we got down the hallway to her bedroom. And that's when I realized we have a murder.
The victim was kind of in a prone position. I noticed the pool of blood was around her head, and I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
I'd never seen a female that was murdered like this. This was my first time to actually see that, and that gets to you.
We proceeded to establish a crime scene.
A few minutes later, detectives and forensics arrive.
The victim had a ligature made of coaxial cable tied very tight around her throat. It was a square knot. There's a couple of places you learn knots like that. Military people probably use that knot fairly often. And so it told me that whoever killed Samantha was versed in the knot based on some training.
The cable was not the only weapon used by the killer.
There was a fire extinguisher a few feet away from her that had hair and blood on it. There was definitely blood at the back of her head, a lot of it.
There were some handprint, ridge detail on the fire extinguisher that appeared to be in blood. It looked like there was some fingerprint detail even on the coax. A strangulation death has some up close and personal aspect to it. Based on what we saw, we thought there was a good chance the killer actually knew the victim.
Detectives examined the rest of the room for any other clues.
In the middle of the bed was a laser pointer.
On top of the laser pointer was some blood spatter. So we figured that the pointer had to have been on the bed when the injuries occurred to the victim.
And looking around the house in general, none of the windows were broken and all the doors were intact. Whenever you don't have forcible entry, your first thought is that it's someone that she knows.
Police immediately begin the process of interviewing Samantha's neighbors.
One of the neighbors had written down that a car with California tags was at Samantha's home. on about January the 1st.
The car from California had been seen 5 days prior, but a different neighbor noticed another suspicious vehicle less than 24 hours before Samantha was found dead.
There was a 12-year-old young man who noticed a motorcycle at Samantha's home. He said it was red and black, and so information about the motorcycle was noted.
Soon, news of the murder reaches Samantha's loved ones.
I just barely got to work when my husband calls and he tells me to come home. And he said that someone had killed Samantha the night before. I went into instant shock. That's just not something you can comprehend. I mean, is this really happening?
I got a phone call from a friend, and he told me to turn the news on, and her house was on the news with police tape all around it. I went numb. I fell to the ground. Because, Samantha, why would someone want to hurt her?
Samantha Lazark grew up in the small town of Terrell, Texas, and was the oldest of 3 children.
Samantha had 2 brothers, Joe Jr. and Lance. He was the baby. And Samantha practically raised him when I could work. She was very responsible. She could cook, she could wash clothes, and she loved little kids, and she loved elderly people. She was one of them late bloomers. She didn't really care that much about boys until she met John.
Samantha married her high school sweetheart, John Lazark, at age 20.
John, he went to school to be a refrigerator repairman, and Samantha worked at the grocery store, and her job was real important to her.
I met her when I worked at Albertsons, and Samantha was everyone's favorite cashier. And you may be having a bad day, and she just make you happy. She was very high-spirited. She loved her cats. She loved music, and she just loved her tattoos. Everything she had a meaning. She had her fairies on both arms. Then she had one on her chest right here that was for John. It said, "Always in my heart."
A devoted wife, Samantha was blindsided when after 8 years of marriage, John left her for another woman.
She just kept crying to make him happy, and she was so devastated when he left.
Samantha picked herself up, and several months later, she began dating again.
Samantha's confidence definitely changed. I think Samantha was just trying to have fun, get out back into the world, try new things.
Who killed this vibrant and kind young woman, and why? To try to answer these questions, police interviewed the couple who found the body, Lori and Donnie Nieves.
With Lori and Donnie, as they were the last ones in the home before the police arrived, we certainly needed to make sure that there was no information that would tie either one of them to the actual murder.
Detectives start with Lori, who says she and Samantha were co-workers.
Lori described herself as being a good friend of Samantha's, and she said Samantha didn't come to work, which was very unusual. She didn't answer the phone. Donnie had taken Lori to work that morning, and so he came back to get her and take her to Samantha's home to check on her. Lori said they knocked on the door and didn't get an answer, but the door was unlocked, and so they went in and looked around, and they went upstairs and found Samantha deceased.
Investigators speak to Donnie next, and he confirms Lori's statement.
Donnie characterized Samantha as being his wife's friend. He said that he was only there because he gave his wife a ride to go check on Samantha.
Detectives ask the couple if they know anyone who would want to harm Samantha.
Lori pointed her finger at Samantha's estranged husband, John Lazark. Lori said that John was upset with Samantha because she was about to end his health insurance coverage that she'd been paying for, and he had an injury that was going to be very expensive if he didn't have insurance.
Investigators learned that this ongoing conflict had recently escalated.
Lori said Samantha told her in the couple of weeks before the murder. Samantha and John argued about the health insurance, and John told her something to the effect of, "I want to take everything you have away from you." And so that threat certainly raised a red flag for us and made us wonder if John Lazark had anything to do with this murder.
Coming up, police unearth a hidden online world.
Samantha signed up for one of the chat rooms. Her username was Meowmix28.
The information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
I warned her plenty of times. Watch who you're giving your address out to.
And hunt a bold killer with sinister motives.
The fact that he couldn't take no for an answer made us want to figure out exactly who he was.
He pressured her to meet in person, and she said, "What if you're a serial killer?"
There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon.
Until investigators close in on an unlikely suspect.
He looked like a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
One of the most evil human beings.
I was seriously afraid that there would be another victim.
Police are investigating the violent murder of 28-year-old Samantha Lazark. Detectives have learned that Samantha and her estranged husband, John, were in a bitter dispute.
She had threatened to take him off her health insurance policy, and Samantha's friend said he did make a threat at one point.
That made us want to know more about John and the relationship with Samantha.
Investigators learned the marriage had only ended 6 months prior. They asked those close to Samantha about what led to the breakup.
Her best friend was going through a divorce, and Samantha, being the kind-hearted person she was, let her move in.
Samantha noticed that her friend and John seemed to be a lot closer, perhaps, than what she was comfortable with.
Finally, she asked them if they were having an affair, and they said, yeah, they were in love.
I remember how upset she was. I mean, how else could you feel when your husband leaves you for your best friend?
John moved out with his new girlfriend, but remained in Samantha's life.
They were separated, but John would move back in with Samantha. When he kept moving in and out, it was hell because he wouldn't leave her alone.
Samantha finally told John to move out for good so she could get on with her life. But John was still dependent on her health insurance.
John, when he was 18, a car fell on him when he was working underneath it and messed up his back. He was really anxious about the insurance.
Investigators bring John in to the station.
During the interview with John Lazark, he said that he and Samantha had sorted out the insurance and that she was not going to terminate his health care coverage.
John also denies that he threatened Samantha like her friend claimed. But as he talks, detectives notice a suspicious detail.
He had some small injuries to his hands that we wanted to talk to him about. John explained that he cut his hands while moving a table. The night of the murder, John said that he was with his girlfriend and that she in fact confirmed his alibi. If I were in love with somebody and they killed somebody else, I may lie for them, but there wasn't anything to contradict what he said. We asked John for fingerprints and a sample of his DNA, and he agreed to do that.
Police have nothing concrete to tie John to the murder. But before they let him go, detectives ask who he thinks might want Samantha dead.
John Lazark told us that his estranged wife was online dating.
John said he told her it was risky. He might run into some dangerous people.
Investigators set out to verify John's claim.
We interviewed Samantha's friend, Lisa, and Lisa told us that she knew that Samantha was in fact online dating.
Samantha told me one day that she signed up for one of the chat rooms. It was so new back then. She just made a username and started meeting guys. Her username was Meowmix28. It was her love of cats, and she was 28 years old.
When she started meeting these guys online, I said, you don't know these people. You're not letting them come to the house, are you? And I could tell that she didn't want me to know because she knew it was going to upset me really bad.
The computer forensics lab examined Samantha's conversations with people online, making arrangements to meet people that she'd chatted with online.
Investigators compare the messages with details of Samantha's dating life provided by her friends.
Lisa told us that Samantha was dating a man named Chris, and she'd spoken with Samantha the evening of the murder, in fact, and that Chris was at Samantha's home visiting with her.
I did not know Chris. I'd never met him. I know she really liked him and liked hanging out with him. She said Chris was over at her house that evening when she called me. I had bought her the latest season of Friends that was out on DVD, and she said, "We're going to watch Friends. I'll call you tomorrow." And that's the last time I talked to her.
Police determined that the call with Lisa around 6 p.m. was the last contact anyone had with Samantha. She was found dead the following morning, just before 10 a.m.
Because Chris was with Samantha shortly before she died, we really wanted to look at to see who Chris was and where he was.
Investigators search for Chris in Samantha's online chats. However, they find her most recent correspondence, only 2 days before the murder, is with a man who goes by the username I Am Elliot.
I Am Elliot said that he had recently lost his wife, and Samantha said, "Well, I've recently lost my husband to my best friend."
I Am Elliot seemed very sympathetic to her in their messages, and she seemed to respond to that.
We weren't sure who I Am Elliot was.
Her conversations with I Am Elliot had seemed pretty innocent, and there was no association with the name Chris, so the investigation moved on from there.
Detectives dig deeper into Samantha's chats, looking for messages with a darker tone.
So the forensic lab was able to retrieve a chat with somebody initialed KS, and the information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
This individual pressured her to meet in person almost immediately, and so that raised red flags about him. He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless, and ironically she said, "What if you're a serial killer?" But in the end she went along with it.
Detective suspicion only grows when they realize the chat between KS and Samantha is dated January 1st, just 5 days before the murder.
One of the neighborhood watch people had seen a Mercedes with California license plates on it that had been at her house January 1st.
It had all of the signs that we were on the right track with this guy. So we ran the license plate number, and the tag came back to Christoph Slora.
Could Christoph Slora, KS, be the Chris who was with Samantha just hours before she was found dead?
Samantha's best friend said that the night she was killed, she was with somebody named Chris.
So we said, hey, maybe this is the Chris that we're looking for.
Three days after the murder of Samantha Lazark, police have linked her online chat to the owner of a car with California plates seen parked at her house just days before she was killed.
The neighbor had written down the license plate number of Christoph Slora's car.
Police believe that Christoph is the man behind the username KS.
When we looked at the online chat between KS and Samantha, they were obviously involved with each other sexually. As we were looking for a Chris, we were really interested in finding that person.
Samantha did tell her friend that she was hanging out with a guy named Chris the night of her murder.
Alarm bells ring when they dig deeper into their suspect's background.
Christoph was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base here in Wichita Falls.
Christoph wound up being somebody that was in the military. There was a perfect square knot in the ligature that killed Samantha, and I've already thought that somebody perhaps with a military background knew that square knot.
While officers are sent to bring Christoph into the PD, detectives receive Samantha's autopsy report.
The cause of death was strangulation, and that the coax was the means.
The report also shows significant blunt force trauma to the back of Samantha's head.
I think it would be really hard to just strangle somebody with a cable, and I suspect that the fire extinguisher was used to incapacitate Samantha so that she couldn't fight back.
There was no evidence found during the autopsy or any other testing that showed there was any kind of sign of a sexual assault.
Forensic analysis of the murder weapons gives investigators hope that the killer will be identified.
From the lab, we learned that the coax had, and that the fire extinguisher also had DNA from who we believed would be the killer.
The evidence that came back from the lab was very powerful. Fingerprints were on both the weapons, so it's pretty clear that if we could find one person that matched all these pieces of evidence, that we had the person that committed this crime, not just beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt.
Armed with new insights into the murder, police head to the local Air Force base to look for their number one suspect.
When we tracked down Chris Laura, we asked him if he would come in for an interview, and he agreed to do that. He admitted that he had had a sexual relationship with Samantha, but they didn't have a whole lot else in common, and he said he hadn't seen her for some time.
Investigators ask him to explain why witnesses saw his car outside Samantha's home on January 1st, just 5 days before she was killed.
At that point, he did not have anything to do with her death or being over there the day of the murder.
Police want to know where Chris was the night Samantha was killed.
Chris Laura said that he spent the day with some friends at a batting cage and offered up the names of his friends. We followed up that information by interviewing his friends, and they assured us, in fact, Chris Laura had been with them during the day and into the evening that day.
Detectives conclude that Chris Laura was not the Chris that Samantha was with when she called her friend at 6 p.m. But they can't rule him out as the perpetrator, since the exact time of her death is unknown.
Even though his alibi was pretty good, it wasn't airtight. And so Chris Laura provided prints and DNA sample for us.
With no hard evidence against Chris Laura, he's free to go. 4 days after her murder, family and friends gather to lay Samantha to rest.
Samantha's funeral, it was packed. It was full of people that loved her. It was beautiful.
She had a really big funeral. It was just hard. Nobody should have to bury their child. And the way she died was so violent, and I couldn't stand the thought of what actually happened to her. I had to take all of her pictures down for a while. I just couldn't deal with it.
The next day, detectives ask Samantha's friends if they know of any other men she may have been involved with, and receive stunning new information.
Lisa raised the name Donnie Nieves to somebody that she thought that had an affair with Samantha.
Lori and Donnie Nieves were the last ones in the home before the police arrived. They found Samantha deceased. I was surprised because when we interviewed Donnie at the time, Donnie characterized his relationship with Samantha as being his wife's friend. But after the funeral, Samantha's friend Lisa said that Donnie was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Lori was a good friend of Samantha's and also a co-worker, but Samantha told me that Donnie and her had a short, intimate relationship shortly before she was killed. Samantha definitely felt guilty about it.
Once we realized that he had been a lover of Samantha's, we had to look at them more closely.
He had not been forthcoming before about this affair, so it makes you suspicious that this person has something to hide, and maybe what they have to hide is they're involved in the crime. That is a red flag.
It's been 1 week since 28-year-old Samantha Lazark was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in her home. Now, investigators have learned that Samantha had an affair with the man who discovered her body.
When Donnie Nieves was first interviewed, he failed to mention that he had been intimate with Samantha. When we interviewed Donnie again and confronted him with the question, were you lovers with the victim, he admitted that he was, and that it had been a very brief, intense relationship.
Detectives asked Donnie why he didn't tell them about the relationship before.
He said he didn't want his wife to find out about this affair because he knew she wouldn't be happy about it.
Had Donnie killed Samantha to keep her from telling his wife Lori about their affair?
We kept digging into him and seeing if there's anything that would connect him to the murder.
Donnie insists he did not kill Samantha and begs investigators not to tell his wife about his infidelity.
We asked him if he'd give DNA and fingerprints, and he cooperated.
Police let Donnie go, and while they wait for his DNA and fingerprint results, investigators uncover another suspicious exchange with an online suitor in Samantha's chat room history.
His username was Death Metal. Samantha formed a relationship with Death Metal based on their mutual enjoyment of that kind of music.
The messages suggest the pair had been on several dates, but then something changed.
From the correspondence, he thought it was a pretty good relationship. And then all of a sudden, without warning, she just told him she wanted to break it off.
The relationship may have been over, but the man continued to send Samantha messages.
The fact that Death Metal couldn't take no for an answer certainly made us want to look at him pretty close and figure out exactly who he was and interview him.
Had the man been so enraged by the rejection that he murdered Samantha? Police ask Samantha's friend Lisa if she can help identify Death Metal.
Samantha's friend Lisa said it was a guy by the name of Connor Days.
Connor was the one that really got to her, made her nervous. I warned her plenty of times, like meeting people online, watch your back, watch who you're giving your address out to, your phone number. And he was the only one that really stands out in my mind that he scared her.
He just wouldn't stay away. He left notes on her door, even though Samantha told Connor that she didn't want to have anything to do with him any longer. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit.
Samantha told me one day he parked in her driveway and just sat there, and she'd call me and she wouldn't know what to do.
Connor would fit that mode of being a stalker, coming around a lady's house all times of the day or night. And that stalker profile is the one that can lead to someone being a murderer.
Connor looked really good for this, only he wasn't a Chris. But Samantha had dated him shortly before the murder, and we certainly knew that we had to find him.
Investigators track down Connor and bring him in for questioning.
When we interviewed Connor Days, he was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. He didn't seem to have a lot of interest in the fact that she was dead. And that was either I absolutely didn't do this, or I'm trying to throw you off, and we weren't sure which one it was.
Police asked Connor why he wouldn't leave Samantha alone after she broke off the relationship.
Connor admitted he kept coming back around even though she didn't want to see him any longer. And it wasn't until she pressed the issue that he actually left her alone. And so when asked for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, Connor said that he was home alone and he didn't have anyone else to substantiate that claim. And that's a problem. Connor was asked during the interview to provide a sample of his DNA and prints for us.
With no hard evidence linking Connor to the murder, he is released. 3 weeks have passed since Samantha was found dead, and investigators still haven't found the elusive Chris that was with Samantha the evening she was killed.
There had been an awful lot of work done, and we still hadn't solved the case. There was kind of a frustrated feeling that the person hadn't been caught yet.
As they await news of an arrest, those closest to Samantha struggle with the pain of losing her.
The mental images, imagining her maybe crying out for her mom or her dad or even me, somebody to come help her. It just makes me sick knowing someone could do that. Like one of the most evil human beings.
I couldn't grasp the thought that my daughter was gone. and she wasn't coming back.
1 month into the investigation, police are running out of leads. But then they receive the forensic results they hope will blow the case wide open.
When you get information about whose prints and whose DNA is on that coaxial cord that was around the throat, that's just the place where you work to be. There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that was the killer.
It's been 1 month since Samantha Lazark was killed, and detectives have just received lab results from evidence found on the murder weapons.
We had all these suspects and were able to obtain possession of DNA samples and fingerprints.
Will the results match John Lazark, Samantha's estranged husband, Donnie Nieves, who had an affair with Samantha and also found her body? Or one of her online suitors, Connor Dace or Christoph Slora?
It did seem like we were on the brink of solving the case, but the results came back, and it did exonerate all these people.
Investigators are stunned. The DNA and fingerprints don't belong to any of their suspects, or even anyone in the police database.
We were hoping for the match, and it's a little disheartening when you think maybe you've got something, and then it turns out not to be at all.
I talked to the DA and the lead detective, but I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
It did concern me that Samantha was never going to get the justice that she deserved.
With the investigation back to square one, police review all the evidence and statements they've collected so far in their hunt for Samantha's killer.
While we were looking back through the notes, we remembered that there was a youngster in the neighborhood that said something about a motorcycle having been around the night that Samantha died. So we asked the computer forensics people to look for the keyword motorcycle, and they came back with information that, in fact, I.M. Elliott said that he had a motorcycle.
When detectives previously looked at chats between Samantha and I.M. Elliott, they didn't find any red flags in the correspondence or any indication his name was Chris, so they moved on to other leads.
Our conversations with I.M. Elliott had seemed pretty innocent, and during the correspondence, he told her he worked out at Metro Photo.
Metro Photo was a camera shop in Wichita Falls.
Investigators rushed to the store, hoping to locate their new suspect.
The 12-year-old said the motorcycle was red and black. And we went by the camera shop, and there was a red and black Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It was an aha moment, if you will.
We ran the plates on the motorcycle. We found out it did belong to a person named Christopher Kyle Russell.
The tag came back to Chris Russell. And we said, Chris. Aha. It made it even a bigger aha moment for us. And that's when we decided it was time to know more about Chris. And Chris Russell was enrolled at Midwestern State University here in Wichita Falls, taking some criminal justice classes. He looked like he came from a good home, and he was a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
His family was well-to-do, respected members of a large church here in town. His profile was almost too good to be true.
Our first interview with Chris was a trip to Metro Photo, where we went in and asked him to come with us, and he did.
At the station, investigators begin by asking the 21-year-old if he was with Samantha on the night of her murder.
He was polite, but he declined to give an interview. He was asked to give his DNA samples and fingerprints, and he said he needed to talk to a lawyer before he did anything.
Even though it's Chris's right to tell us no, maybe it's because he had something he didn't want us to know. So we served Chris a search warrant in order to obtain prints and DNA from him.
As detectives wait for results, they continue to look into Chris Russell's past and discover he served in the armed forces.
Chris had in fact been in the Marine Corps, but only for a matter of days. They sent him packing after they got a good look at him. That was a large red flag that the Marine Corps didn't want him.
With Chris looking increasingly suspicious, what detectives discover next is chilling.
In the chat between Chris and Samantha, he said that he had recently lost his wife, and we looked into this and found some, frankly, rather terrifying information.
Investigators learn that Chris lived in the small town of Chadron, Nebraska with his wife Tara, who died only 10 weeks before Samantha's murder.
It was a short time after she had passed away. One night he packed up his belongings and moved back to Wichita Falls from Chadron.
Police contact law enforcement in Nebraska for information about the death of their suspect's wife.
Chris Russell's wife died under circumstances that at first was ruled pneumonia. However, when the autopsy came back and there was noted some bruising on the neck, that tells me that probably wasn't pneumonia. That sounds to me like a strangulation.
But by the time the autopsy information was released, Chris had already had his wife cremated and left the state.
I think the original autopsy didn't go into enough detail for authorities to charge Chris with that murder, and now that she had been cremated, that was never going to happen.
Police fear they have an emerging serial killer on their hands. Detectives obtain a search warrant for Chris's residence.
Chris lived with his parents here in Wichita Falls. While we were executing the search warrant, we noticed in Chris's bedroom a photograph that we thought was Samantha, but that was his deceased wife, Tara. Chris Russell's wife died, and weeks later, Samantha's now dead, and she looks incredibly like Chris Russell's wife.
Police uncover more disturbing clues in Chris Russell's bedroom.
We found a book, and it was a book about knots. And had I not known that there was a square knot around Samantha's neck, I probably wouldn't have looked twice at that book. And we also found some laser pointers.
The laser pointers found in Chris's bedroom were nearly identical to the one found at the crime scene.
There wasn't actually a smoking gun found during that search warrant, but there were certainly bullets to load that gun with.
Investigators seize Chris's computer and confirm that he's the man behind the username I Am Elliot. But as they start reviewing his chat logs, police discover another troubling detail.
We found that Chris, not only was he seeing Samantha, but he was seeing another young lady in Wichita Falls as well.
Fearing that their killer could strike again, police rush to track the woman down.
I was terrified about her. I was seriously afraid that she would be another victim in what looked like a continuing pattern from Chris Russell.
Police investigating the murder of Samantha Lazark have learned that their prime suspect's wife died under suspicious circumstances and believe that his new girlfriend is in grave danger.
I was worried he would do something else again. This nice young lady has no idea what she's involved with. We were certainly worried that she might be another victim in this case.
Detectives locate the woman and inform her that Chris is under investigation.
She was surprised to find that Chris perhaps was involved with a murder here in Wichita Falls. When we interviewed her, she said that Chris had brought her a DVD of Friends to her home and that it was opened when she got it.
Investigators believe it's the same DVD Chris had watched with Samantha on the night of her murder.
Samantha told her friend Lisa that she and Chris had watched that DVD of Friends at her home. But when we searched the crime scene at Samantha's house, the Friends DVD was not there.
With the evidence against Chris growing, police receive his DNA and fingerprint results.
In the end, there was only one person with DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that would be who killed Samantha, and that was Chris Russell. We arrested him at work, As I recall, he didn't seem surprised we were there at all. In fact, he didn't have anything to say about it.
At trial, prosecutors put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
The day of the murder, they were having a nice Sunday afternoon together and went out to her house, and her friend Lisa talked to her on the phone and things were still going good when he was there, evidently.
Maybe Chris brought her a laser pointer so that she could play with her cats. Then something happened that caused him to be angry.
The first thing was a surprise attack from behind because the bruises were all on the back of her head. He knocked her to the floor. At that point, the coaxial cable was in connection with the television set, and he had evidently ripped it out, which indicated a person who was very angry. And she's desperately trying to fight him off. At the same time, he starts looping that coaxial cable around her throat once, twice, and then a third time. And then he ties the knot there, and all the time she's getting weaker as blood is flowing out of her body. Then he strangles the life out of her.
With no confession from Chris, no one knows his motive for murdering Samantha.
You'd always like to know exactly what happened at the Lazark home that night, but something caused him to decide that he was going to kill her that night.
The jury finds Chris Russell guilty, and the judge gives him the maximum sentence of 99 years in prison.
There was an overwhelming sense of relief that we had taken somebody from society and put them someplace where they weren't going to harm anybody. And that's that big, deep sigh you get when you know in your heart that you did a good job. When you look at Chris Russell at first glance, you see a nice, clean-cut young man who was going to college to better himself and who was a regular churchgoer.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all. I guess what we should take away from a case like this is that we need to take caution when we meet people online. You can't be too careful.
An investigation is later opened into the death of Chris Russell's wife, but no charges have been laid. For Samantha's family and friends, the pain of losing her will never go away.
I want my daughter back, which I know it's, not ever going to happen. And she was special. She really was. She loved everybody. And she loved her mama the best. But I don't know what to say. I don't know. We can't get her back.
That day, Chris took my best friend, an amazing person, a person that can never be replaced in your life. I know she's watching down on me. I know she tries to protect me, and Samantha inspired me to definitely not take things for granted and to just live each day, make it the best I can. She's just made me a better person.
A self-made couple making plans for the next stage of their lives.
They were getting ready to have a quiet retirement.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back.
They had a lot of friends and loved spending time with family.
Gunned down, execution style, in their own home.
It just seemed to make no sense. Who would do that, and what could possibly be the motive?
While searching for the killer, investigators uncover a world of greed and deceit.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money.
He felt he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb.
People were saying that he was very upset. It certainly is motive.
A series of chilling discoveries.
We learned that he was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Everything he's told us is a lie.
Points to a killer no one ever imagined.
People were shocked.
It shows what a messed up psyche he's got.
It was unbelievable how somebody can be that cold-blooded.
On the outskirts of La Crosse, Wisconsin, lies the prestigious neighborhood of Berry Mills. In early spring of 2010, this quiet community is rocked by a disturbing 911 call.
911, what is the address today? Okay, what's going on?
I'm at my mom and dad's house. I came out to check that on the...
Your dad is what?
He's on the floor.
Where's your mom?
My mom is by the computer.
Is your mom breathing?
No.
Okay, and your dad is not breathing?
No.
Okay, all right.
Police race to the scene. First responding officers lead 40-year-old Eric Kola away from his deceased parents' home, while detectives head inside.
We could see that there was a male lying on the kitchen floor. There was a large pool of blood around his head.
The blood was coagulated, so it had been there a while. It wasn't fresh blood.
He was holding his car keys in one hand. He had his coat on, so it was clear that he had just walked in the door. He hadn't even set everything on the counter yet. As I viewed the male victim, the wound appeared to be a gunshot. It was near the temple of his head.
Around the corner is like a hallway entryway with a computer desk, and the female victim was there. She was shot in the head also.
Her hands are on the keyboard, and so you could see that she had been typing before she was shot. What she was typing didn't appear to be significant, but it made us believe that she had no idea that someone was behind her going to shoot her. It appeared that they ambushed them.
The victims are identified as 68-year-old Dennis Kola and his wife, 65-year-old Myrna. As investigators examine the scene, they make note of other telling details.
We didn't know if it was a single killer or more than one person, but you would expect more disturbance if there were more than one, or that they would have overpowered the victims, and that didn't seem to have happened.
With Myrna sitting at the computer comfortably, it led us to wonder if she was the first to be killed. And her husband, Dennis, came home, and he was the second one shot. There was the smell of decomposition. At that point, we weren't sure how many days earlier they were killed, but we needed to get information pretty quickly.
Detectives find no sign of forced entry and no indication of any kind of struggle.
The crime lab comes in. They collect fingerprints and DNA and the computer for analysis. We went upstairs and we noticed in the one bedroom there was a dresser that was disturbed, and it appeared that it had been ransacked. What was unusual about it was the person started at the top and worked their way down with the chest of drawers. But if you did it that way, you wouldn't be able to see what was in the drawer below it.
This looked like someone was trying to make it look like a burglary, but nothing seemed to be missing.
And there were many other valuables in the house, including Myrna's purse, and Dennis' wallet was still in his back pocket. It looked like this was staged, quite frankly.
While investigators continue searching for clues, they find what could be a key piece of evidence.
The bedroom had a .22 rifle in the closet. There's also a box of .22 shells on a shelf that had been moved and partially opened.
That was very possibly the gun that was used in the homicides.
So the gun is sent to the crime lab for an analysis.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of the murders spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
When I heard about it, I thought, I can't believe this is happening. I was devastated. It hit me real hard. It was like, why would somebody kill them? Everybody loved them.
Born and raised in Wisconsin, Dennis and Myrna Kola had been happily married for 42 years.
Dennis and Myrna had a lot of friends. They had deep roots here.
They had children and grandchildren, and they were very popular.
I didn't hear of anyone that had anything bad to say about either one of them.
From humble beginnings, Dennis rose to become a successful businessman.
Dennis had graduated as a pharmacist, and he had owned a number of pharmacies and businesses throughout the years in different locations.
I worked with him for 2 years. As a boss, he was down to earth, fantastic guy. If you needed something, he was there. He treated me like a daughter.
Dennis was successful in life and in love.
Him and his wife, they were always happy, having a good time. Myrna had a lot of energy. She was very sociable.
Myrna was very well educated, and she was presently teaching part-time on a substitute basis.
They had a good marriage. They enjoyed life.
The couple had 2 children, their son Eric and 37-year-old daughter Cindy. Both were married with families of their own.
Their family seemed pretty tight. Dennis and Myrna, they were involved with their kids and involved with their grandkids.
These were parents who were very dedicated. They really wanted the best for their kids and loved spending time with family. Dennis and Myrna were getting ready to have a quiet retirement and relaxing and enjoying life.
Now, those dreams have been brutally snatched away.
Both shot. I would have never in my life expected something like this to happen.
It just seemed to make no sense. We're trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
While police bring the Cola's son Eric into the station to get more information, investigators go door to door looking for witnesses.
We start canvassing to see if anyone saw anything, heard anything.
Nobody in the neighborhood had seen anything suspicious.
For them, it was just mostly shock. They couldn't believe that these 2 people had been killed.
As detectives continue to search for a lead, they get their first break.
One of the neighbors mentioned that he thought he knew the motive and why it happened, and also the murder.
He was very concerned. He believed that his life was in danger. He felt that he may be next.
This neighbor, Steve Burgess, was a banker, and he thought that he may have been the intended target of the homicide. His reasoning was he had got a threatening call multiple times from a person that threatened to kill him.
Coming up, new evidence emerges.
The day after the homicides, he cashed his $50,000 check and never told us.
And family secrets come to light.
There was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the 2.
Dennis always complained that he was worthless and that he didn't want to work.
She had apparently lit into Dennis in a rage.
Until a disturbing clue reveals a twisted plan.
Someone had put this threatening note in his mailbox.
Now he believes that someone was out to get him.
And exposes a cold-blooded betrayal nobody saw coming.
I never thought they were the kind of person that would do something like that.
It was extremely unexpected.
It's just chilling.
Grandparents Myrna and Dennis Cola have been brutally executed in their own home. Now, one of their neighbors, banker Steve Burgess, tells investigators the killer could be coming after him.
He was very concerned, and he believed that someone was out to get him, and he didn't know who, but the homicides may have been intended for him and his family.
Detectives ask Steve why someone would want him dead.
So at that time, the market crashed. There was people with money issues.
A lot of people came to him at the bank for loans, but they had no collateral. So people were very angry that Steve would not give them loans. The last threat was a couple of days earlier. It was a threat of violence. It certainly had to be taken serious.
If Steve was the intended target, how did Dennis and Myrna end up gunned down instead?
What he explained was a Google Earth search in front of Burgess's house showed the wrong address, showed Dennis and Myrna's address instead of his, and he thought that the killer killed the wrong people.
He felt that somebody had come to his house to follow through on the threat, but they ended up at Dennis and Myrna's residence. It was a concern that this possibly could have been a mistake on behalf of the murderer, and the homicides were not intended for Dennis and Myrna.
Before investigators can pursue the lead, the autopsy results arrive.
The autopsy report determined that they were both shot with a .22 caliber rifle.
But it was inconclusive. There wasn't enough bullet fragment left to tell if it came from the gun that we found in the house. No fingerprints were found. I mean, even from the victims, like the gun had been cleaned up.
The autopsy report also confirmed that they had been deceased for a few days before the 911 call. It was likely that they were killed on that Friday.
The time of death sheds new light on the threatening phone call made to neighbor Steve Burgess.
We saw that call had come in Sunday morning after the Kulas were murdered. So the timeline it didn't make any sense.
We were able to determine that the threats against Steve Burgess had nothing to do with the deaths of Dennis and Myrna.
With their first lead a bust, detectives turned their attention closer to home.
We knew Eric and his sister Cindy were very close to their parents.
Eric did day trading and stuff like that, work on stocks. He was doing well. Dennis and Eric were pretty close. Some people would say like bread and butter. They'd have get-togethers all the time.
Eric was the one that found the bodies. We needed a conversation with Eric for information that he might be able to provide us.
Hoping he can provide details about the crime, investigators interview Eric at the station.
Eric was still extremely emotional over the death of his parents, but he said he wanted to be as helpful as he possibly could and would do whatever he could to try to find who was responsible.
Detectives asked how he came to find his parents had been killed.
He said the school called and said that Myrna hadn't shown up for work. They called his parents and they didn't respond.
So Eric tried calling and was unable to get an answer, so he called his sister and asked if she had any contact with them, and she had not.
He became concerned and drove over to the house.
Once he walked in the house, he observed his father lying on the kitchen floor and started searching for his mom, and then also found her deceased.
Eric said he was extremely close to his parents. His dad, supported all of his endeavors. They were just the best of buddies.
We asked Eric what was the last time he had seen his parents, and he said a few days before the homicides.
He visited them like he did all the time. He said his dad was working on the deck, and his mom was doing laundry. There didn't seem to be anything unusual.
Investigators asked Eric where he was on the day of the murders.
He said that Friday was he and his wife's anniversary. He had worked till 2. Then he helped his buddy Mike do some work in a bathroom. They were renovating a bathroom. Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house, looking for a specific plant that his wife liked, a hanging plant.
Eric presents a receipt stamped at 6:15 p.m.
After he bought the plant, he went directly home, and they got ready to go out for the evening with friends to celebrate the anniversary. Eric said that he had tried over the weekend to contact his parents and wasn't able to do so. He was becoming concerned, but just thought that they were busy.
When asked who might have wanted to harm his parents, Eric says they were well-liked and had no enemies.
It seemed really strange, really unusual. No reason for the victims to be killed. Both victims killed.
Before concluding Eric's interview, detectives get results back from the crime lab.
The report came back indicating that the time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Myrna was using the computer, and the last keystroke was 5:41 p.m. So that gave us a timestamp. That's huge.
With the keystroke data, detectives verify Eric's alibi.
We spoke to his friend Mike, and Mike said yes, Eric was here until about 5:30 when he left. And he was going to go to the store. So he basically confirmed what Eric was telling us was correct. The receipt, combined with what his friend Mike said, it appeared that there wasn't enough time for Eric to commit the crime. Also, it just seemed very unlikely that someone who loved his mother and father very much could be involved in something like this.
Before Eric leaves the police station, he remembers crucial information that takes detectives by surprise.
Eric had told us that his sister Cindy and her husband Pat were being financially supported by Dennis and Myrna, and that their dad, Dennis, told Cindy they were getting cut off financially.
The Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy had called Dennis. Dennis let her know that there was not going to be any more money. She became very upset.
Had there been an argument over money leading Cindy to kill?
That's extremely unexpected, but she did have motive, so you start looking at Cindy as a suspect.
Police investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their daughter Cindy may have been angry with her father after he cut off financial support. The two had a tense conversation just hours before the murders.
When we started talking to the circle of friends and family, we were told Dennis was more than generous. He gave tens of thousands to Cindy and her husband.
Cindy relied on her parents. They needed this money to pay their bills. When Dennis had told Cindy that he was cutting her off, she didn't know how those bills were going to get paid.
Detectives learn the Colas children are set to inherit over $700,000 from their parents' death. While son Eric is known in the community as a successful businessman, Cindy's circumstances are different.
Cindy didn't have much money, if any, and she was constantly asking for money because they were not making ends meet.
She was working a minimum wage job or a little above that, and Pat, her husband, couldn't keep a job, would quit or get fired. They were living paycheck to paycheck and Dennis's handout to handout.
Me and Dennis would talk about Cindy at the pharmacy, and he kept telling me that he was sick and tired of supporting her every month, helping them out with their bills and stuff like that. And that Friday morning, he was very upset, and he said, "My daughter called me this morning, crying on the phone because I told my daughter that I'm cutting her and her husband off."
When she would get upset, she would get just extreme, over-the-top emotions. Cindy hearing that the cash cow was being butchered would be a reason for her to now go off the rails, and it went from bad to worse.
Cindy became a strong suspect.
Police bring Cindy into the station for questioning.
Cindy appeared broke up over the deaths of her parents, but she really laid out the family dynamic. Her parents had considered her the black sheep of the family. She said that she didn't believe her parents cared about her like they cared about Eric, and she was upset with how they treated her.
She told us, according to her parents, that Eric could do no wrong and that Cindy was a disappointment and continued to be a disappointment.
But Cindy denied that she had anything to do with her parents' death, even though there was this friction between them.
Investigators questioned Cindy about the argument with her father the morning of the murders.
Cindy downplayed the conversation she had with her father. She said just that she was disappointed her father had said he wouldn't give her any money. But it wasn't a negative conversation.
Detectives wonder if Cindy is more guilty than she's letting on.
There was a lot of tension between Cindy and her parents. There was disapproval there.
We looked at desperation. She was desperate for money with the inheritance, and given her bad feelings, all these things could lead to the fact that she may have been the one that took the lives of her parents.
With suspicion swirling, police asked Cindy where she was when her parents were killed.
On Friday, she was working and had left at 4:45. They have a time clock. She had punched out.
After work, she had stopped at the store. Just after 5:30, she purchased beer and ice, and then her and Patrick at a barbecue with the neighbors.
Police work to confirm Cindy's alibi.
She was working, that was verified then. Cindy had stopped at a Quick Trip, and the Quick Trips all have video, so she was on camera at a Quick Trip near her home at the time of the homicides, not anywhere near her parents.
While Cindy is ruled out as the shooter, her husband Patrick comes into focus.
Family and friends said that Patrick did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and Patrick stood to inherit a substantial amount of money along with Cindy.
Dennis did not like her husband at all. He told me that Cindy's husband married Cindy for the money because he knew that Dennis and Myrna had money. Dennis always complained that his son-in-law, Patrick, was worthless and that he didn't want to work. He sits and plays with the video games, and he's too lazy to go find a job.
Investigators dig deeper into Patrick's relationship with his in-laws.
Talking to family and friends, we learned that Dennis and Myrna were upset when Patrick and Cindy got married. They asked Cindy not to marry him. They felt that he lacked motivation, and they remained unhappy with him. I think the feeling was mutual.
According to some reports, when there was alcohol involved, he could have been a violent person.
Apparently, the Friday morning of the homicides, Cindy told Patrick that they were not going to be getting any more money. People were saying that Patrick was even more angry than Cindy, that they were being cut off financially. It was a large red flag.
Detectives also learned Patrick had the capability to pull off an execution-style hit.
Eric and other relatives were now pointing us toward Patrick, saying that he was a Marine and that he knew how to handle weapons.
It certainly moves Patrick up to the top of the list as far as suspects.
Police hunting the killer of Dennis and Myrna Cola believe their son-in-law, Patrick Cowell, has motive for murder.
Patrick was a great interest to us because he did not get along with Dennis and Myrna, and he stood to inherit a lot of money, so it certainly is motive. And Patrick was in the Marine Corps, so he would be an expert marksman.
When I heard that the police are starting to question him, I thought maybe after Dennis mentioned cutting them off, that might have triggered his son-in-law to kill them both.
At the police station, detectives confront Patrick about his relationship with his in-laws.
Patrick said that he was not popular in that family, that he was not comfortable with them. They weren't comfortable with him. There was kind of a cold relationship. He knew from Cindy that they were being cut off from Dennis and Myrna. He wasn't happy about it, but he denied having any involvement in the homicides.
Investigators press Patrick about where he was at the time of the murders.
He was without a job at the time, and basically he spent most of his day on the sofa with Xbox. We asked if he had any guns in the house, and he agreed that he did. We asked if he would turn those over to us, and he said he would.
As detectives wrap up their interview with Patrick, patrol officers are dispatched to collect the gun and gaming console, which are then sent on to the crime lab.
The gun had been analyzed and, in fact, was eliminated as the weapon used to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Also, we were able to prove through the crime lab that he was on the Xbox at the time he said he was. And so that eliminated him because he was home at the time that Dennis and Myrna were killed.
With Patrick ruled out, police are left scrambling for new suspects. The unsolved homicides leave the community on edge.
When a crime like this happens in a small town, like Berry Mills, there's a lot of pressure on law enforcement to get it solved. People want answers. These aren't strangers to them. These are people they know.
People in that neighborhood were fearful. You know, the closer you are to something like that, the more concerned you are.
We were kind of scared for our lives because we didn't know why something like this would happen.
Looking for new leads, investigators dig into Dennis's business connections and the wealthy pharmacist's other ventures around town.
Dennis had a nephew, Nick Herring, who was promised a business from Dennis. They were going to open a car dealership together and actually did.
What we understood was that Nick was very familiar with running car dealerships and had done a good job.
Business was good, but then Dennis changed the deal.
As the dealership was up and running, Dennis brought Eric, his son, in to start running it with Nick, and there was some jealousy, maybe bad blood between the two.
Nick was like complaining all the time, so Dennis had to go help out with the business. Dennis said they could not get along together, and he ended up buying Nick out.
At that point, Nick was quite unhappy, and there was some falling out.
Tension mounted until Dennis sold the business, leaving Nick resentful.
Nick lost a pretty substantial amount of money, so he would certainly have reason to be upset.
Could Nick have harbored a deadly desire for revenge? Police bring him into the station for questioning.
We spoke to Nick Herring, and he admitted that the relationship had soured.
Nick had said that Dennis had given him too low amount for the business and that he got cheated out of some profit. Nick felt that he had been treated badly, basically kicked to the curb by his uncle.
Despite the bad blood, Nick insists he's not involved in the murders.
Nick said that it was in the past that he had started his own car dealership. He was successful, and that although it was upsetting, he wouldn't hold a grudge, and he had no reason to kill Dennis and Myrna.
Nick said that he had worked until about 5:30. Then he had picked up his girlfriend, and they'd gone out to the tavern. We were able to confirm that he was at work all day, and then the bartender where they were at could confirm that he and his girlfriend had spent the evening. And so we were able to eliminate him.
Having ruled out yet another suspect, the investigation into the Cola murders hits a roadblock.
It was very disturbing because it just seemed to make no sense. Here's a couple that are a retirement age, had long, successful careers. For someone to come in and just murder them, it's senseless. We were still trying to understand who would do that and what would be the motive.
1 week after the murders, police receive news that jolts the investigation back to life.
We get a call that a patrol car is being sent out to Eric Kula's residence for a suspicious item in the mailbox. Eric said that he had got a threatening letter. He was now extremely concerned that he was going to get killed.
One week after Dennis and Myrna Cola are ruthlessly gunned down in their own home, police learn their 40-year-old son Eric has received a threatening note. Could he be the next target?
Someone had put this note in his mailbox. He was really, really concerned. This note said, "Fixed you." The message is kind of unusual, but Eric thought they'd killed his parents and were now going to come after him.
He had no idea who would have left it or where it came from.
There was an envelope, but it wasn't mailed.
The handwriting looked like it was done by someone very young. It was so strange. It was probably written that way, so a handwriting analysis couldn't be done.
When it comes to Eric's safety, detectives don't take any chances.
We have to try to figure out what was going on.
We had an investigator and a camera to watch his property. We start canvassing Eric's neighborhood to see if anyone saw anything.
But with no witnesses, police are still left with no idea who placed the note.
This is perplexing. We're trying to determine, was this somebody local or was this someone from out of the area? We were very concerned.
With this new potential threat, investigators cast a wider net to find the Cola's killer. But when they scour Dennis and Myrna's computers, phones, and finances, they're surprised at what they find.
We subpoenaed Dennis and Myrna's bank records and noticed that there's a check written and cashed on Dennis and Myrna's account for $50,000. It's cashed on the day after the murder, and it's made out to Eric Kula and was deposited into Eric's bank account. It seemed really strange. So you just found your parents dead, and the next day you go cash a check for $50K. It had to be looked at.
Detectives reach out to Eric, hoping to learn more details.
Eric's explanation is his dad gave it to him on the day that he had stopped over at his parents' house.
That's very interesting because of all the conversations we had with Eric, he never mentioned this, and suddenly we have a check for $50,000, and if everything was okay, why wouldn't he tell us about it?
To have a check that was deposited the day after the murders by a family member, that set off alarms for investigators.
After we find that check, we look for other checks.
We used a forensic accountant to review Eric's finances because it was quite complicated with the day trading that he was involved in. When the accountant went through it with us and explained what we were looking at, I think we almost fell off our chairs because we had no idea that this was what was going on. He told everybody that he was extremely successful with his day trading, but Eric was broke.
He was day trading, but it was a myth as far as making profit. The person looking at his financials basically called BS. She told us this guy's worth nothing. He's worth about $2,000 total. He was blowing smoke.
Then, police uncover more startling information about Eric's financial circumstances.
We learned that Eric was also going to his parents and receiving large amounts of money. Through the years, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. He led everybody to believe that he was doing so well, including his wife. Eric told her that he was making a lot of money. There was nothing to worry about, that he was just doing great.
Despite everyone's impression that Eric was this successful day trader, his parents had been funding his and his family's lifestyle.
If he was going to have to admit that to family, friends, it was going to be devastating.
Detectives learn when Dennis and Myrna stopped financially supporting their daughter, Cindy, they also cut off Eric.
We knew just shortly before Dennis and Myrna were killed, Eric found out that he was no longer getting money from his parents.
The damning evidence continues to pile up against Eric.
Dennis told me he was giving money to Eric, but basically he was done giving to both kids. He says, I need to tell them I'm done supporting them. It's about time I put my foot down and cut them off.
As investigators start to discover that Eric is not what he seems, shocking results come back from the lab.
The state crime lab did a handwriting analysis on that check for $50,000. It wasn't Dennis's signature on that check. We found out that it was Eric's handwriting, that he had forged his father's name on that check.
Everything he's told us is a lie. So things are starting to really roll toward Eric.
Police obtain a warrant to search Eric's home, hoping to find additional incriminating evidence.
We're in the basement. Among other things, was a box of envelopes in a desk drawer. The fixed U note had a security envelope, and every one of them has a different pattern for their security pattern. Lo and behold, those envelopes have the same pattern. We were able to determine that envelope in Eric's mailbox with the fixed U note came from the box of envelopes in his home. From his fire pit in his backyard, we found things that would be associated with making a fixed U note. A spring from a spiral notebook. The letter was written on spiral notebook paper. A barrel of a pen used to write the address. Those types of things are in the fire. So that fixed U note came from his house. It didn't look good for Eric.
In the search, detectives also discover a .22 caliber rifle, similar to what police believe was the murder weapon. The gun is sent to the ballistics lab for testing.
With the lies and forgery, we were pretty confident that Eric was our guy.
But at that point, Eric had an alibi for the entire time that the homicides were occurring, so we're trying to figure out how he shot Dennis and Myrna.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Dennis and Myrna Cola suspect the couple's own son, 40-year-old Eric, is the killer. But they need hard evidence to lay charges.
We went out and started re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing all the evidence that we had.
As detectives try to learn more details about Eric's connection to the crime, the ballistics results come back. Police wonder if the rifle found in Eric's home will prove to be the murder weapon.
Dennis and Myrna were shot with a .22 caliber rifle, but Eric's gun wasn't the gun that was involved in the crime.
Undeterred, detectives recheck Eric's alibi for when his parents were being murdered.
The time of death, based on the computer analysis, was 5:41 on that Friday.
Prior to the homicide, Eric said that he had helped his buddy Mike renovating a bathroom.
When we originally talked to Mike, he said that Eric had left his house about 5:30, but when we re-interviewed him, he said it's very possible it could have been earlier. Once Mike's story changed, we really thought that we were heading in the right direction.
Investigators take a closer look at Eric's timeline.
Eric had told us that he had gone to 2 stores after leaving his buddy's house to get a specific plant for his wife. At the time of the homicide, he had stopped at the first store, and that store didn't have it, so he had to go to the other store, got the plant, and produced a receipt.
Eric's receipt is stamped 6:15 p.m. The second store is located only 10 minutes from the Cola's residence. But where was Eric at 5:41 when his parents were being shot?
We checked with the garden center, the first one he went to, and they had plenty of those plants on the day and time that Eric said that they didn't have any. We also reviewed video footage, and he's not there, nor is his vehicle seen coming or leaving the parking lot. So there was a window of opportunity for Eric to commit the murders. He had no alibi for the time that the computer showed that Myrna was shot.
With Eric's alibi torn apart, detectives bring him in for another interview. They begin by confronting Eric about forging the $50,000 check.
Eric explained that he had permission from his dad to write checks out to himself, and that his dad had actually given him the check, but just was too busy, so told him to sign it himself. He told us, "I write them all the time," and that was commonplace for him to do that. It's a lie, an approvable one. He's never written one. He couldn't produce a single check that he had ever written. He was confronted with the fixed U note and about the envelopes, and that they did come from his house. With what we found and what we knew about his financials, all of those things together are great evidence.
We just went down item after item after item after item, and Eric acted, in my opinion, desperate, and he wanted to leave.
But Eric was no longer free to go. On July 29th, 2010, police charge Eric with the murder of his parents, Dennis and Myrna Cola.
What we believe started this whole crime in motion was the fact that Eric was being cut off financially. He was desperate.
Detectives piece together how the double homicide unfolded.
We believe he went to see his mom at their home, and Myrna was sitting at the computer, and then Eric walked upstairs, got the gun that was located in the closet, came down and shot his mother, and then waited for his father to arrive. When Dennis came home, he was shot almost immediately, within seconds after he walked through that door.
After the murders, Eric wipes the gun clean and returns it to the closet.
Eric then took a check and said to himself, $50,000 will get me through until the will is settled.
After he shot his parents, he went to a garden center, bought the plant for his alibi, and went home to celebrate their anniversary dinner that night.
He's as cold-blooded as a murder-for-hire man. His parents did nothing but love him and take care of him his whole life. He's a narcissistic little son of a bitch and thought that his dad owed him a living.
Eric Cola's arrest stuns the community.
Everyone thought that he was this golden child, that he had a great relationship with his parents, that he was this successful day trader. That he could have done this, people were shocked.
I would have never expected Eric to do this. The way Dennis talked about him, always bragged about his son, and I never thought he was the kind of person that would do something like that.
In June 2012, 2 years after Dennis and Myrna Cola were killed, a jury finds their son Eric guilty of intentional murder.
His sister, Cindy, during the sentencing hearing, was sobbing, and she begged the judge in that courtroom to make sure justice was done that day.
Eric Cola is sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 6 years for forgery.
Many times I've thought about how somebody could do that, and I just simply can't fathom it. I guess we all lose a bit of our innocence when this kind of thing happens.
Myrna and Dennis are still dearly missed by their family and friends.
They were such a beautiful couple. They would give you your shirt off their back. I think of them very, very often. And my memory of Dennis is always a smiley face. I do miss him a lot. Sometimes I still think, boy, why did it have to be you? He'd still be living right now, happy life, finally retired, and enjoying his grandkids. And Myrna would probably still be dragging him on vacation.
A gregarious young man, just months away from his wedding day.
He was always happy. All he wanted in life was to have a family, work hard, and fall in love.
Has his future viciously ripped away.
It was evident the young man had been bludgeoned.
It hurt me so much, and I lost it. ¿Viste? Me volví loca.
Investigators are sent down a rabbit hole of suspects.
He was violently jealous. He's a significant drug dealer. It looked like that he may have been kidnapped. They were accompanying a very scared-looking Hispanic young man.
Before a shocking revelation.
What he was describing was more like something off of a TV show.
Turns the case on its head.
What he did to us changed our life forever.
It was a shock to all of us. It came as an absolute surprise.
He had no remorse, he had no guilt. He's a monster.
Cornelius, a small town in northern Oregon, nestled among picturesque orchards.
Cornelius is a longtime farming community. It's a very kind of nice, sort of sleepy place.
It's kind of a little bedroom community. It's mostly a blue-collar town, working class.
The calm of Cornelius is shaken one quiet morning with the reported disappearance of 20-year-old Gonzalo Pizano Guzman.
That morning, my mom saw that Gonzalo's bed was made, like no one slept there. So she obviously got all concerned, and he didn't come home last night. And then my mom tells me to go to the police station with Sol to report him missing.
His fiancée, Sol, and his sister, Juana, had been actively looking for him that day.
That morning, the family contacted his place of employment. He had not shown up for work.
The family was extremely distraught by this disappearance. He doesn't miss work without calling in. They couldn't reach him by pager or by telephone.
And we're all freaking out because this is not who he is and what he does. It's so odd. It's not normal.
We learned that Saul had seen Gonzalo the night before. They had visited with each other until about 9:15 that evening, and Saul reported seeing him leaving in his car alone, headed home.
But he did not return home last night.
To aid the detectives, Saul provides a description of what Gonzalo was wearing when she last saw him.
He had on an athletic top with some numbers on it, and specifically 2 gold chains.
While Juana and Saul speak with police, other family members frantically look for Gonzalo.
We all went different ways in our cars, driving around just to see if we found his car. We were trying to look for anything.
My dad thought, maybe he got in an accident. We were desperate. We just wanted a clue.
Around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we all started feeling like, okay, something's wrong now.
On the outskirts of town, Gonzalo's father makes a disturbing discovery.
My dad spotted the car in an empty field. When he saw the car, the white car, he knew right away that was Gonzalo's car. He found the car burned up. He rushed to the car, opened up the car, and didn't find any body. So once that happened, it was just nuts. Where is he at? Did he get kidnapped? Is he dead? It was even worse.
Detectives arrive and search for signs of what happened to Gonzalo.
The car was totally destroyed by fire. It appeared that the car had been heavily doused with accelerant, probably gasoline.
Somebody was clearly trying to cover up evidence from inside that vehicle.
There was no evidence of any body.
There were zip ties found near the car.
As far as the scene was concerned, it yielded minimal clues. As the car had been burned completely, the chances of DNA or blood or fingerprints were greatly reduced.
Later that afternoon, another chilling discovery is made, just 11 miles away.
A citizen had seen something that looked like a dead body in the ditch on her road. The body was found about a 15-20 minute drive from where the burned car was.
This young man matched both the physical description, the clothing, and the jewelry. At this point, there was no doubt that this was Gonzalo. It was clearly a homicide. There was evidence of bullet wounds on the body and what appeared to be repeated knife blows to the heart. We also discovered some injuries to the back of the head, and it was evident the young man had been bludgeoned.
It was apparent that he died of violent death.
We felt almost immediately that this was very personal in nature. There was no phone and there was no wallet at the scene, but he still had his jewelry with him, which were gold. So the thought of this being a robbery was off the table pretty quickly. There was another motive here.
There were zip ties found near the body, and they matched the zip ties from the scene of the car. One of the things that went through my head was, had someone brought zip ties to restrain Gonzalo? We also located 4 spent casings from a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
After finishing up at the crime scene, police are faced with the difficult task of delivering the devastating news to Gonzalo's family.
The police came early in the morning. I opened the door and they told me, "We found your brother, but unfortunately he's dead." I was in shock.
Grité. Me volví loca. Y yo gritaba. Y gritaba y gritaba. I heard my mom screaming. It was something I never want to hear again. It's not even a scream. It's a pain so deep that only moms know what that is. I found out that he was murdered. And I lost it. Era gritar, llorar.
algo tan fuerte que todavía de mi mente no se ha acabado.
To know that such an amazing person was taken away, he didn't deserve to die that way. Bottom line is, I don't have my brother anymore.
Born in Mexico in 1979, Gonzalo had a playful spirit.
He loved to dance, he loved music, always a smile, always caring, and always joking around with people.
Gonzalo era un muchacho alegre y llegaba, me abrazaba y siempre quería bailar conmigo.
When the family moved to the United States in 1989, outgoing Gonzalo settled in quickly.
He was very charming. He was really good looking. He was popular with the girls. So he was always asked to be in quinceañeras, which is a traditional, party for us Mexicans when you turn 15.
In 1998, Gonzalo met Marisol Mora at a party, and the teenagers quickly fell in love.
De que estaba muy enamorado de Marisol. Marisol era el amor de su vida de Gonzalo. Era todo para él. Todo.
It was that genuine love and happiness. There was a light in him. He was a completely different person, a happy, full person. All he wanted in life was to have a family, work hard, and fall in love.
After a whirlwind romance, Gonzalo proposed to Marisol.
So the wedding was set to be in September. That was just a couple of months after he was murdered. We have a big family, so it was going to be a big deal.
But instead of a wedding, Gonzalo's loved ones are left heartbroken and grieving. While his family plans a funeral, detectives are digging into the work of this homicide case.
This case was puzzling. There really didn't seem to be a strong motive as to why this young man was murdered. Everything was going good in his life.
He was responsible. He wasn't involved in gangs.
He's just very well liked, very upbeat, and just a trustworthy young man.
It was really difficult. There were still so many unanswered questions, and we had no definitive leads as to who would have caused this or who we were looking for.
The fact that there was still a killer out there, to me, it was very ominous.
This is very grim. We needed to really look into who was responsible for this.
Coming up, investigators uncover a menacing grudge.
He held an extreme dislike for Gonzalo.
He was determined to have Gonzalo killed.
The knife wounds directed at the heart did speak of extreme animosity.
And leads them to discover a web of alarming secrets and lies.
She wasn't in love with Gonzalo, and he wasn't in love with her.
She admitted it was all a lie.
He saw skinheads in the vehicle.
And that's when we really started to think something was wrong.
Before the truth blindsides everyone.
I was in shock. It was so senseless. It was so senseless.
In the town of Cornelius, Oregon, police are investigating the vicious murder of 20-year-old Gonzalo Pizano Guzman. Wanting more details about his last known movements, detectives speak to his fiancée, Sol.
She described in detail how Gonzalo had come to her house on the night of the 6th, that they sat out front on the porch.
They were discussing their plans for the upcoming wedding and going over a guest list. She stated that following the conversation that he left around 9 o'clock. She stated while they were sitting on the porch that her cousin Jaime and a friend Eddie were playing in the garage of the house, apparently shooting baskets.
That led us to believe that these two young fellows may have been the last known persons to see Gonzalo alive. So it was important that we interview them.
Investigators bring Jaime and Eddie into the sheriff's office.
During the interview, both stated that they had to get to work that night and approached Gonzalo as he was getting in his car and asked if they could get a ride.
They were running late for work. They worked on a janitorial crew run by Saul's brother, Raphael.
They had to be at work in Hillsboro at the Hawthorne Farms Fitness Center at 10 o'clock.
They said Raphael picked them up and took them to work at the athletic club. and that eventually they got off at about 4:30 in the morning.
The fact that they both gave the same statement actually provided themselves an alibi. They did not offer any conflict that they had with Gonzalo. They indicated that they had no reason to hurt him.
To corroborate Jaime and Eddie's alibi, police speak to their boss, Saul's brother, Rafael.
We interviewed him at his house. He was very cooperative, very smooth, very polite, had his own business, a young entrepreneur.
Rafael was an incredibly self-possessed 19-year-old. He had created a janitorial service.
Although he was very young, had a very good contract, had his own cleaning company, and appeared to be very successful.
Detectives ask him to confirm Jaime and Eddie's story.
He confirmed that he had picked them up at Eddie's house and drove them to work. He confirmed their story that they had worked cleaning the health club that night. He said that he was at the athletic club until about 4 in the morning. So Rafael, in effect, corroborates Eddie and Jaime's version of events on the night of the 6th. So we kind of set them aside.
With Jaime and Eddie alibied, investigators turned to the autopsy report, hoping to find new leads.
It became very apparent just how violently he had died.
The medical examiner did find 3 blunt force blows to his skull.
The autopsy also showed that he had been shot 5 times. And then he had also been stabbed 5 times, very brutally, in the area of the heart.
The close cluster of the knife wounds directed at the heart did speak of extreme animosity, some violent emotion. The gunshot wounds made it appear that his hands were up in a defensive gesture. Gonzalo was likely pleading for some measure of mercy, and ultimately none was to be had.
The autopsy report also determines that Gonzalo's death occurred around 10 p.m. With the findings in hand, investigators now turn to Gonzalo's workplace, searching for possible suspects.
We interviewed his supervisor. Gonzalo's boss described him as reliable, steady worker, punctual.
As detectives dig deeper, they learn about a startling new side to Gonzalo.
It appeared that he had a relationship with one of the security guards that work there.
Gonzalo's boss did tell us there may have been some possible involvement between the security guard, Bobette, and Gonzalo. So we needed to look into it. We needed to interview her.
Police bring Bobette, Gonzalo's alleged girlfriend, in for questioning.
She was very upset about his death.
She was very emotional, very distraught about finding out that Gonzalo had been murdered, and ultimately disclosed that, in fact, she had had a very intimate relationship with Gonzalo for a couple months, but she made it very clear she wasn't in love with Gonzalo, and he wasn't in love with her.
Bobette described her relationship with Gonzalo as kind of a fling. It was kept secret. She understood that he was engaged to be married, but it crossed our minds that maybe Bobette's feelings were stronger than she let on.
Maybe she did not want this wedding to go forward.
The wedding was planned for September, only a few months away. Police asked Gonzalo's coworker about her movements on the day of the murder.
Bobette had been at several different locations that day, running errands, and she had receipts to support that. So she was ruled out as a suspect.
But while Bobette's cleared of suspicion, she hands detectives a crucial tip.
Bobette mentioned an ex-boyfriend named Oscar Rodriguez.
She told us Oscar was quite jealous. He was extraordinarily jealous, apparently had been violently jealous in the past. About 4 days before the murder, Oscar had found out about her relationship with Gonzalo. He became infuriated and began accusing her of cheating on him. That could be a motive for Gonzalo's murder, so Oscar became a lead suspect.
Only 2 days into the investigation of the vicious murder of Gonzalo Pizano Guzman, police discover he was involved with his coworker, Bobette. Now she's pointed the finger at her jealous ex, Oscar Rodriguez.
She speculated that maybe he had something to do with it. We looked into him. He had a criminal history.
He'd been pretty extensively involved in gangs at that point in his life, and he was well known to the local police.
Very much an impulsive young man that was also involved in drug activity and drug use. Bobette told us that this was a relationship she had to escape from. She personally felt threatened by his presence and his behavior. And she was very worried that perhaps he was the one that took some action towards Gonzalo.
Investigators uncover a troubling detail about Oscar's life.
It was discovered that Oscar Rodriguez's mother lived right next door to the victim's family. The investigation kind of perked up as far as focusing in on Oscar, given the fact that he had such access to Gonzalo.
Detective suspicion grows further when they speak to Oscar himself.
When Oscar Rodriguez was interviewed, he lied to us and told us he had not had any contact at all with Bobette and didn't really know anything about what was going on. When we started to confront him that this was in contradiction to the information that we had from Bobette, he became furious, started yelling at us. "You don't trust me." He stated he had no claims to continue any relationship with Bobette, and he wanted to wash his hands of this entire investigation. Because of his nature, he just drew suspicion upon himself. He was asked if he'd take a polygraph to show that he didn't have anything to do with Gonzalo's murder. He became very volatile and immediately demanded to end the interview. Then actually stormed out of the interview.
With Oscar not cooperating, detectives investigate his whereabouts during the time of the murder.
During this time frame, Oscar Rodriguez was actually serving a sentence in the Restitution Center.
The Restitution Center is a work-release facility for low to mid-level offenders, where Oscar could get passes to go out and find work.
So the question was, did Oscar have a pass at the date and time of the murder? Was it possible that he wasn't in the Restitution Center? He is on a strict timeline. He had to check in, check out. It's a secure facility. The building is locked. There are alarms on all the doors and windows.
At the Restitution Center, there is a lockdown period at night until early in the morning.
After the records were examined, it was positively concluded that he was in the Restitution Center at the time Gonzalo was killed.
It was impossible for him to have been involved in the actual homicide.
And ultimately, he was ruled out as a suspect.
It's been a week since the murder, and the investigation is no closer to finding a suspect. Meanwhile, the family prepares to bury their beloved Gonzalo.
It was really hard on everybody. My mom decided she wanted to take him to Mexico. He was buried over there, and we all stayed for a while trying to grieve together as a family and process what had just happened to our family. My mom was just devastated.
It hurt me so much to lose Gonzalo. I was grieving deeply. I was in denial. I was in my own world. And I don't even know how I got by.
While the family grieves in Mexico, the community of Cornelius is feeling on edge.
There wasn't a quick arrest within a couple days or a week. This caused concern in the community because no one knew who did it.
Searching for new leads, detectives turn to the public.
We decided to put out a reward for information, and the idea was to get people to come forward if they knew anything and let them know that we're a little bit frustrated with where this investigation is going. We need public help.
Nearly 2 weeks after Gonzalo's murder, police get a tip that sends the investigation in a whole new direction.
We got a call from an employee of the SB gas station.
His name was Ryan Petty. He claimed that he had seen some graffiti written in the bathroom of the gas station. And the graffiti said, "Gonzalo Guzman, 12th Street Gang, please help, call the police."
And once he heard about the reward, he put Gonzalo with that name Gonzalo and recognized it must be the same victim who had left that cry for help on the wall.
Detectives rush to the gas station to interview Ryan. While interviewing him, he divulges a shocking revelation.
So what called his attention to the bathroom was shortly before he saw a car pull up, a white Monte Carlo, that had, in his words, skinheads in the vehicle.
One of them allegedly had a swastika tattooed on his body.
They were accompanying a very scared-looking Hispanic young man.
He stated that it looked like that Gonzalo may have been kidnapped. That was significant in the fact that we felt this was a big break that came in the case.
Nearly 2 weeks after Gonzalo Pizano Guzman was found brutally murdered, a gas station attendant named Ryan Petty has told police he saw Gonzalo with 3 suspicious men the night he was killed.
He described a carload of skinheads that had drove up and a young man in the back seat who appeared frightened, and they escorted him into the men's restroom for a short period of time.
He said that ultimately out of the bathroom, the Hispanic individual came out and they hustled him back into the car and drove away. Ryan Petty reported that when he went into the bathroom after an individual left it, he saw written on the wall, Gonzalo Guzman help 12th Street gang call police.
But as detectives dig into Ryan's story, some details don't add up.
Had it been Gonzalo who had gone into that bathroom afraid for his life and put his name on the wall, he never would have written his name as Gonzalo Guzman.
We knew that was incorrect. He would not sign his name in that nature. That was the maternal name. He would have used the paternal name.
Guzman is his mother's name. He would have written his name as Gonzalo Pizano. Pizano is his father's name.
And so, right away, this was suspicious.
And just the whole nature of what he was describing was more like something off of a TV show. The skinheads, the swastika. It just didn't ring true.
And so it was suspected that he was trying to come forward for the reward. We looked through the videotape from the SB station during the period of time this employee stated that car had gone by. There was nothing in that videotape that corroborated anything he had told us.
No white Monte Carlo, no individuals who could be characterized as skinheads. More importantly, no individual who was a scared Hispanic person being escorted to the bathroom.
The examination of the surveillance video at the gas station contradicted Ryan Petty's version of events. And also, one of the issues was he didn't report this right away.
When police check Ryan's record, they find more troubling news.
He had a pretty checkered past.
He was no stranger to the criminal justice system.
Some of his arrests were for crimes that would cause you to doubt his honesty. In my mind, we ruled it out as pure fabrication. It just was too cute, too stereotypical. The mistake with the Spanish surname, I didn't buy it.
With another lead exhausted, investigators face a daunting realization.
We reached a point where we were getting nowhere. Leads weren't panning out.
Having no significant suspect is very depressing.
Really, if you don't solve these cases early on, the longer they go, the likelihood that you're actually going to be able to solve them becomes less and less.
In cases like this where we're not getting anywhere, especially on a homicide, we took this very personal. Up to that point, this team had not had an unresolved homicide.
The lack of progress also adds to the pain suffered by Gonzalo's family.
It was very hard. It was very painful to come back from Mexico and there was no arrest yet.
Fue algo fuerte para mí. Mucho dolor. Tenía mucho coraje y mucho odio en mi corazón.
Everything was very silent and we were getting very, very impatient. My mom was getting very impatient with the detectives and all they told us is to please trust them. So we put our life in their hands.
2 more months pass without an arrest. With the case at a standstill, detectives review the entire investigation for something they may have missed.
It can be very frustrating when you reach that point where you've kind of hit the wall, but you just have to resolve to redouble your efforts and to keep digging, keep pushing.
It was time to go back and look over everybody one more time. We knew that Eddie and Jaime were the last people to see Gonzalo at Saul's house the night of the murder.
Even though they'd been interviewed and gave a pretty good account of their activity that night, their boss, Raphael, provided an alibi for them. We wanted to be sure. So at this stage is when we asked them to take a polygraph. But when we began to ask them to take a polygraph, they started dodging and weaving.
For some reason, they began to balk, and this threw a red flag as to why they weren't coming forward. Again, these are the last 2 people to see Gonzalo alive, and now they're getting cold feet about taking a polygraph exam.
And that's when we really started to think something was wrong.
Detectives keep the pressure on Jaime and Eddie, and on September 14th, Eddie comes in for his polygraph.
The polygrapher was hooking Eddie up, attaching these leads to him to measure his response. And he doesn't even get to the questions. And Eddie says, "Okay, I'll tell you what happened."
And he immediately makes it clear that he wants to tell everything that happened.
In police parlance, he spilled it.
Two months after the murder of Gonzalo Pizano Guzman, detectives are re-interviewing witnesses, hoping for a break. Now, Eddie, one of the last people to see Gonzalo alive, has told police he knows more than he's let on.
He gave a detailed, recorded statement about what happened on the night of the murder.
As he talks to investigators, Eddie drops a bombshell.
He disclosed that he had actually been approached by his boss, Raphael, who was Saul's brother, to coordinate delivering Gonzalo to the Forest Hills Country Club parking lot.
Eddie told us that it had all been planned out by Raphael. Raphael had enlisted Joe Noble to help with this crime. Joe was Raphael's friend. Eddie went on to tell us that night he and Jaime lured Gonzalo to drive his car to the golf course. And as they pulled up, Joe Noble appeared with a gun in his hand. And as Eddie and Jaime got out of Gonzalo's car, Noble got into the car, pointing the gun at Gonzalo. And also present in the parking lot was Raphael and his white Ford F-150.
Gonzalo was driven away by Raphael and Joe, but Eddie claims he has no idea what happened next.
He stated that he and Jaime had left the country club and got into their vehicle, left and went home and went to work as usual.
Could the brother of Gonzalo's fiancée, Saul, really be behind his brutal murder?
It was extremely surprising to suddenly see Rafael Mora as somebody different than this really incredibly self-possessed 19-year-old who started his own business.
But according to Eddie, Raphael leads a disturbing double life.
Eddie told us that Raphael was a pretty active drug dealer.
The nice entrepreneur cover of Raphael was all a lie. He's a significant drug dealer, and it appears orchestrated the kidnapping of Gonzalo with Joe Noble.
This completely surprised me. Raphael did appear, at least on the surface, to be legit, and now he's just not who we thought he was.
It was a shock to all of us.
The one thing detectives still need to know is why Raphael would want to kill his future brother-in-law.
Up to that point in time, there was nothing to link him. There was no motive that anybody could speak of.
Investigators first turn their attention to Joe Noble, suspecting he may have been taking orders from Raphael.
Joe Noble was known as a small-time criminal. An informant told us he was very concerned about a .40 caliber pistol he had sold to Joe Noble. and he suspected that this may have been the murder weapon used in the killing of Gonzalo.
That's not the last of the informant's revelations.
He said that Joe Noble had talked to a female at one of the local bars and had asked her to alibi for him on the particular night in question.
We contacted her. She told us that yes, Joe had asked her to say he was with her on the night of the 6th, and most importantly, she said I wasn't with him.
Police bring Joe in for questioning.
Joe denied having any involvement whatsoever to the murder.
During our interview with Joe, he actually tried to use the alibi, and then when we confronted him with the fact that we'd already talked to her and she said it was all BS, then he stopped talking.
Joel stated that he wanted an attorney and didn't want to talk anymore.
With nothing concrete to hold Joe, police are forced to release him and turn their attention to Raphael.
Investigators learned that Raphael's cleaning business was not all that it was purported to be. He had a contract with the Hawthorne Farms Athletic Club.
The manager of the health club was not very impressed with the quality of Raphael's work and the work of his crew.
It was really a shoddy operation, by all accounts.
We considered the fact that the cleaning company may have been a front for Raphael's drug dealing.
Raphael told police he was cleaning the gym with Eddie and Jaime the night of Gonzalo's murder, so investigators checked with management in order to corroborate his alibi.
The manager of the club said he often couldn't reach him, so we had no idea if he was there or not on the night of the murder.
With his alibi falling apart, detectives ask Raphael's sister, Saul, why he might want Gonzalo dead.
Saul admitted that Raphael had had a serious talk with her and that it was clear that he was opposed to the wedding, felt she was too young.
Raphael did not want Gonzalo marrying Saul. Just did not see Gonzalo as being worthy of marrying into the family. Investigators learned that Raphael would mock Gonzalo for the car he drove. He'd mock him for bringing over a bottle of wine to his parents that was cheap and not any good. Raphael held an extreme dislike for Gonzalo. When accompanied by friends, he would go by Gonzalo's car and talk about keying it or smashing a window out and laughing about it.
With the evidence against Raphael stacking up, police are ready to bring him in for an interview. But there's just one setback.
He disappeared. At this point, it's become pretty apparent that Raphael's got something to hide. When you put it all together, there was probable cause to arrest him.
With a warrant for Raphael's arrest, police initiate a manhunt.
He had a girlfriend named Sandy Montez. We found him hiding at his girlfriend's house. He had dyed his hair orange, and it was obvious that he had done it to try to change his identity.
On September 28, 2000, Raphael is officially charged with first-degree kidnapping and aggravated murder.
I was in shock. I had so much anger at Raphael. It's an anger I can't explain.
Just when police believe they have their man, the investigation takes another shocking turn.
We had Raphael in custody when his girlfriend showed up with evidence stating that there was no way he could have been at the murder scene. This raised some obvious concerns.
Could it be possible that Raphael was not involved in Gonzalo's murder?
It came as an absolute surprise.
Police have arrested Rafael Mora in the death of his sister's fiancé, Gonzalo Pizano Guzman. But now, Rafael's girlfriend, Cindy, claims she has an alibi for him on the night of the murder.
Cindy produced a receipt from a auto detailing place that purported to have dropped off Raphael's vehicle the night of the murder, and that Raphael was there and signed for it. It was presented as a solid piece of evidence that Raphael was working at the athletic club the night in question, and they had the receipt to prove it. And an individual named Cassandra, who owned the company, had signed off and was going to be an alibi witness.
Checking the validity of the receipt, police interview Cassandra, who admits to being a friend of Raphael.
With a little bit of prodding by the investigators, she finally admitted that, in fact, the receipt was fake.
She confessed it was all a lie, orchestrated by Raphael.
It was something that she dummied up because Raphael had asked her to.
With Raphael's alibi discredited, investigators turn up the heat on co-conspirator Joe Noble.
He told the officers that he hadn't been completely honest.
He admitted that he was at the parking lot at the golf course. He was there when the car was burned. He admits the kidnap. He admits to pistol whipping the victim.
He said that it was Raphael ordering him to do that. They then picked up Gonzalo, put him in the back of a Ford white pickup truck.
And then Raphael drove Joe home with the victim knocked out in the back of the truck.
But when he last saw Gonzalo, albeit knocked out, was still alive.
And then supposedly Raphael would have then driven back out to Hag Lake and killed Gonzalo.
Detectives have a hard time believing Joe was not there when Gonzalo was finally killed, but have no proof.
We had no physical evidence that we could link them to the crime, and it was frustrating.
Desperate, investigators obtain security footage from businesses along the route they believe Raphael and Joe would have taken to and from the murder. Something on one of the tapes grabs their attention.
We saw Raphael's pickup pull into the gas station to get gas.
And lo and behold, there's Joseph Noble getting out of the white Ford and going into the gas station.
And the timing of the gas station surveillance footage indicated that would have been probably shortly after the murder.
Police also obtain a warrant for Raphael's phone records.
Raphael insisted all along that he couldn't have committed the murder because he was miles away cleaning the gym. And lo and behold, at the time of the murder, his phone was not bouncing off the nearest tower to the athletic club. It was bouncing off the nearest tower to Hag Lake, which puts him in the area of the murder. That was huge.
I felt ecstatic because I knew in that moment that we had him, and it absolutely, conclusively meant that his alibi at the athletic club was false.
This was a big moment of actually having some physical evidence.
There's a great deal of satisfaction, too, having found the truth.
With the new evidence in hand, prosecutors are confident they can secure a conviction. And in 2003, Joe Noble and Raphael Mora are tried together.
Both were charged with aggravated murder and with kidnapping in the first degree.
At trial, prosecutors present a picture of what they believe happened to Gonzalo the night he was murdered.
Raphael did not want him marrying his sister.
Raphael was determined to have Gonzalo killed.
And so he hatched a plan to get Gonzalo out to the golf course.
Lured Gonzalo out there with Eddie and Jaime.
After getting out of the car, Gonzalo was beat and pistol whipped and thrown into the back seat of the pickup. Raphael or Joe then set the car on fire and they proceeded to Hag Lake.
They drove to an isolated spot. Gonzalo got out of the car. The gun was pointed at him.
We believe that he was shot multiple times by Joe and that Raphael was the one that wanted to get the final word in and stabbed him multiple times in the heart.
On the stand, a witness reveals Raphael bragged to him about the murder.
That Gonzalo was begging for his life, that Gonzalo was promising that he would stop the relationship with Saul, that he would move to Mexico.
Mató a mi hijo de esa manera tan cruel. Gonzalo no se merecía esa muerte tan fuerte, nada más para que no se casara con Marisol.
No one deserves to be killed that way. No one. It was so senseless. It was so senseless.
On April 28th, 2003, the jury finds Raphael and Joe guilty of Gonzalo's murder.
Joe was sentenced to life with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Raphael was sentenced to straight life, no possibility of parole.
After 5 years in prison, Raphael appeals his conviction, arguing ineffective counsel.
The judge decided that this case should go back to trial, which was a shock to all of us.
Ultimately, a decision was made to allow Raphael to plead to manslaughter in the first degree.
Raphael's sentence is reduced to 25 years and 10 months. With time served, he will be eligible for early release in 2024.
He had no remorse, he had no guilt. He's a monster. What he did to us changed our life forever. He destroyed us.
Even after everything they've endured, Gonzalo's family remains inspired by his memory.
Yo lloré por muchos años, mucho tiempo, y un día yo lo soñé. Yo estoy bien, ma. No llores por mí. Yo estoy muy bien. Y yo lo miré riéndose y me dijo que ya no llorara por él, que él estaba bien, que él estaba en paz.
He was a happy person that wanted everybody around him to have that same joy and made sure that we were always laughing. Those are the moments that I will always cherish the most. Gonzalo was one of the most genuine men that I've known, that I continue to admire.
you.